to the three families. But what I would like to do is, I'm just going to skirt forward to this, is to actually, so I'm a little slow to start because I want to take you to the empirical material and then come back to some of these ideas. And this empirical material comes from a study, an international study with Professor Marianne Hedegaard from the University of Copenhagen. She had particular families in Denmark, and I had particular families in Australia. And I want to just give you a little bit of background to this. So one family, the Peninsula family, as you can see the age range of the children there, in a very poor community within Australia, as would be defined in Australian context. And the Western Port family, as you can see the profile there of the family as well, in terms also in a very low socioeconomic context. Both families very similar in terms of the conditions of the community in which they live. Both families having very different resources available to them. Families were not in employment, so they were drawing upon in Australia government resources to live and government housing. And the work that Marianne did in Denmark and the work that I did in Australia featured this idea of following the children for 12 months, where we spent a lot of time in the family homes, in my case, video recording, making video observations of children early in the morning when they first woke up, and through to observing them on weekends, going to after-school activities, at school, at preschool, also the dinner time events, and in the evenings, bedtime routines. So to gain a picture of the children in terms of the children's everyday life. My colleague Gloria Quinones and I both visited, and we had a special technique where Gloria would be in one part of the home and I would be in another part of the home holding a video camera, recording, having the camera down here so we could still maintain eye contact with the family, and video recording and following the children as they engaged in their activities. And because we were there for such a long time, we became part of the context in which they were in. These are just the details in relation to what I've just mentioned, and you can see in the orange at the bottom the observation schedule that was completed. So 3 sets of observation periods in that time with 5 visits. And in my case, 100 hours of video recordings were made. So this just as a little backdrop, and I can talk more of the details in relation to the concepts we use for analysis. But what I would like to do is now use this material to actually go back to some of these ideas. And Nikolai, of course, talked about the content of the concepts, the content of the concept of Perizhivanie, and the social situation of development being a central dimension of this. What I want to do is show you a video clip of an everyday interaction in the family, focusing on Vygotsky's idea of play, and of course Vygotsky's conception of play is that children create and adults create imaginary situation in which they change the meaning of objects and actions in their play, and that they use objects often as a pivot to support their play as they engage in that imaginary situation. So we're going to look at, and I'll ask the technical people at the top in a moment to press the button, but I would like to explain this little video clip first, because I'm going to show you from this very first family just some material that gives some illustration of the kinds of play activities that the children were engaged in. And then I'm going to show you the other family and the kinds of play activities they were engaged in. And there I want to talk very much about the social situation of development of those children in relation to the play that was being created and how each of the children experienced the social situation as a social situation of development in a very unique way, and as the dimensions of the content of the concept of Perizhivanie. So we'll have a look at the first family because, as Fernando mentioned, the subjective configuration of the individuals is created historically in those family homes and many other experiences historically and what the family provides and so on. So I want to give you, first of all, an insight into the first family, but I won't do a lot of analysis there. I want to use it just as a point of contrast so that you have a sense of one family so that I can then talk to you about the other family in more detail. Pardon? Yeah. So you will see that this child here will engage in a play activity with the parent. And I'm going to show you the next example, which is the follow-on of that play activity. And the child and the mother say, come here you. There's not a lot of discussion, there's more physical activity, but it is nevertheless a play activity that occurred occasionally in this family home. There wasn't a lot of imaginary play occurring, but much more physical activity. So if we could please press, if we could go back. Okay, if you could please put the, that's it, thank you.
Oh, good. Hey, come here.
Come here, you! Ha! Come here, you! Gotta get you! Hey, you! We got you! We got him, Marilyn! We got him! Yeah!
Okay, so that's the first little clip to give you a sense of the joy and the pleasure of the family in playing this game. Now I want to show you the next clip. Oh, sorry, I keep going the wrong way on this. Okay, if we could, in this case, what I'd like you to pay attention to particular now is in relation to how the child with the red t-shirt interacts with the mother, and then the other child, you'll see, the slightly older child, how that child together, it turns into a little bit more of a hitting game. But I want you to look closely at the reactions of the children in relation to the hitting. So if we could play this video clip. Now have a look at the expressions.
Oh, hey.
Oh no, and you've got 4 of them to wear you out. I've only got 2.
Oh, this is crazy, I tell you. Listen to me, you! Hey!
Okay, I don't know if you picked it up because it's quite subtle, but on the children's expression, because of how they are subjectively configured, the playing game, there is a kind of a tension in the hitting, in the sense that what they're bringing to this particular situation is the previous experiences they've had in relation to hitting. And so they're judging very quickly if this play is continuing or whether this is turning into something a little more serious. And so there is, could you see that in the expressions? Is that something? I'm getting some nods, yeah. So this is part of this particular family, and how the children are configured. And what I want to do is also add to this, that this is part of, as I mentioned, a very poor family. And the next clip that I want to show you is very dark, so I hope you can see it, but you should be able to hear the intensity. This is in the morning where the children are beginning their day. So we hear it very early in the morning. I think it was about 6 o'clock or 6:30. And the lights are actually quite dim because that's part of saving resources in the family. So that's why the actual video clip's rather dark. But what this child is doing now, that you saw playing joyfully and then being a little observant as to how this play was proceeding, was that this child is now looking for food in the fridge, and you'll see that there's not really much food in the fridge, and then I want you to see the kind of interactions that occur, which will give more meaning to what you've previously seen. So if we could have this pressed. And the mother says, "Don't start," in a moment. The child begins by saying he's hungry. So he's intensely looking into the fridge, trying to find something that he could eat for breakfast. He says he wants a muesli bar. It's a breakfast cereal. Now the muesli bars are kept in the bedroom in a cupboard up high because they're quite precious. And they're part of the school snacks that are available to the older child only.
There isn't any rice bar. They didn't got a rice bar. That's all there is.
He says there's no more muesli bars. There's no more. Okay. We can probably stop the video clip now. That's enough. So if we could stop the video clip. Thank you. The subjective configuration of this particular family and what they bring to the particular play. So the reservation that the child had in terms of play was very much based on the kinds of prior experiences that this child had had and how they'd come to understand interactions with family. But now, for a point of contrast, I want to take you through to the next family, because the next family is very interesting. The next family, as I mentioned, has the same level of configuration. The same background as this particular family, but the everyday family life is very different. And so in this family, the parents do play with the children as well. They create imaginary situations with the children. And in this particular case, we're going to see a sequence of clips to show you the kind of play that's occurring in relation to football. And I know football is very popular here. It is also very popular in Australia, as you well know. And this is, they're going to be playing Aussie rules football, so it's slightly different approach. And what I want to do is illustrate, first of all, if we could play this clip in just a moment, but of this everyday practice at home. So if we could play the clip, and you'll see this kicking of the football backwards and forwards. So these are the family of 4. Now, in the next slide, you'll see, in this particular case, you could see different... You can see the different interactions between the children. We're going to watch the younger child now. You'll see that she has a lot of agency and controls the football of the father. So if we could play this clip, and you'll see she points to where she wants the father to be. So if we could press the video clip, please.
And then sometimes they ride their bikes just out the front in just the top bit of the
she's
football.
directing the father. Yeah, that's a great space there for that, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you usually ride round to the next drive.
Okay, so it gives you a little bit of background. Now, what I'll do is show you the next part of the sequence, where they've moved from the backyard of the house to the front of the house, and what you will see happening in a moment is that on the front veranda, which you can't see, but you'll see the grandmother waving her arm. She changes the kicking actions of the children to an action of an imaginary situation of actual football. So it changes the context in which they're playing. So this is part of the background that I want to, before I discuss it in detail. So if we could play that, please.
Get on the line!
Quick, get the ball!
Go in there!
So the grandmother says, quick, get the ball.
Get him, Jamie! Get him! Oh, push in the back!
So push in the back. And why I illustrate that is that we go a little further now and have a look at, oops, sorry, wrong way. And we actually, I've got the stills there, but if you could click onto the bottom part, the bigger image, please. And I want to show you how the grandmother now participates in the football.
Go, Jamie!
Okay, so the mother has changed the actions from kicking to an imaginary situation. In the context of what you'll see now, in these two clips, you'll see actually how, in this particular social situation of the football, the social situation or development of each child is actually highlighted very nicely in this video clip. And I want you to pay particular attention in these two clips, the first one, to the young child, and you'll see the uncle who's participating in the football now, actually supporting the process. So if we could just show the first one. So she's holding the ball.
Get you!
The younger children don't take the ball away from her. The uncle puts a little bit of pressure on her by stamping his feet behind her, and she then gives the ball to the mother. If we have a look at the next clip, please.
Get out the road, Dad!
No, big kick.
Oh! Hey!
Okay. So I illustrate those through that very much that we see here a very nice example of how the social situation has actually, the same situation is experienced very differently by all of those children, and this latter example, and particularly because the four children are experiencing the football quite differently, but of course it's being mediated very much by the grandparent, the father and the uncle. And in these particular developmental trajectories of these children, as Nikolai mentioned, becomes very evident when we start to think about the social situation of development as a very powerful concept as part of the content, as Nikolai said, for the concept of Perizhivanie. And that in these examples you can see a very positive situation of how Perizhivanie, where you have the relations between the social situation and the social situation of development quite specifically. And how this one very same experience is being experienced completely differently by the very young child, who is being given that space in which to create, in which to develop further her own competence. But also we see the older children being given the capacity to kick to the father and to engage in what the grandmother then creates, which is from a kicking action to a football game, which requires a higher level of competence to be able to take the ball and run with it and kick it and have other children trying to take the ball away, or the parents pretending to take the ball away. So the imaginary situation changes the conditions from kicking to the ideal form of the football play. And the ideal form of football play, of course, where we have the relations between the real form of those children and the ideal form of which they are imagining. And this is why I think play is rather interesting, because it actually highlights and creates conditions for an imaginary situation which makes evident or foregrounds an ideal situation, because those children in Australia, and in particularly in this family, if you were to look at all of the data that I have access to, are very much in a culture of football in Melbourne. So this is something that families are living and breathing and discussing and watching on TV and as a national sport and so on. There are very many instances of this ideal form present, but it's the relations between in this football game that you saw, the relations between how they're imagining this and what competence and capacities these children are bringing together. So again, this is an illustrative of what Nikolai touched on in relation to the content of the concept of Perizhivanie. But the social situation of development, of course, is incredibly important. But like I illustrated in the first family, what those children, how they've been subjectively configured in the work that Fernando has talked about, and maybe I'm not interpreting your work correctly, you can make corrections later, but the configuration of that family and what each individual child is bringing to the play situation in that first family is very different to the second family. So in the first family, in the imaginary situation that the mother has created with holding the infant and chasing the other child and then turning into a sort of a hitting game, is viewed a little more suspiciously. There is a very different kind of emotional energy around that situation, and how each child has been subjectively configured and how they read that situation. So that situation then is not only how it's being read and how the person's being configured, but also how that the individual's social situational development comes to understand that. So the very young child who's being held is an active agent with the mother being carried. But the child who's doing the hitting checks when she hits the mother's bottom, and then the mother in turn sees that the other child is doing something that she's not very happy about, and she gives a little quick hit to that child. So there is this very, very grey area that emerges. In the other family, of course, when the grandmother changes the situation into an imaginary situation of football, each of those children and what they bring to it, how they are subjectively configured, is that there is a great joy and a trust that this situation is going to be something very rich and positive. So we can see very clearly that the historical dimensions of the kinds of experiences that these children have had, and how is really what creates the conditions in which refracts how they interpret the emotional situation for each child in a very different way. So I wanted to illustrate those to you today as concrete examples of kind of discussions we've had already on the panel, and to try and bring this together a little in the next few minutes. By suggesting that one of the two very central points that I think have come up from the panel that I want to elaborate particularly, and as a way of moving forward. And it'll be very interesting when we begin our discussions in a moment from you as a group. This notion of Perizhivanie is a concept with content, as Nikolai has mentioned. And so Nikolai specifically encouraged us to think about Perizhivanie not as an everyday concept, but as a scientific concept. And I think this is very important, so we don't make the mistakes, and he used the metaphor of the zone of proximal development, of introducing a concept into general discussion in a very rich way internationally, and not really explore what this concept actually means in a scientific way. And I think that's a very important message for us to be considering. He mentioned social situation of development as part of that content, but I know that also if we look at the problem with environment, Vigotsky also talks about the ideal and real form, the relations between the ideal and the real form. And I know Nikolai's writing, he has also mentioned that as well. And Nikolai mentioned also, if we're thinking about Perizhivanie and development, then the discussions around the genetic law of cultural development through drama is a very central dimension of moving that forward. So I think that's a really useful point of discussion for us in a moment to explore further. We also discussed in Fernando's work some very important dimensions where he historically discussed the tensions or the challenges that we have in exploring the concept of Perizhivanie from the very beginnings, with the sort of dualistic views that existed at the time, and behaviourism in particular, and what kind of focus historically that had and how that took people in a particular direction, which in many respects the historical configuration makes for a very challenging situation where it's very difficult, as we know Vigotsky said. We can easily learn new facts, but to think about one idea, at least the logic that we draw upon and how we think about the world and the psychological functions, as whether they are if we're looking at subjectivity or subjectivism, then the historical dimensions, Vigotsky certainly said that it's easy to learn a new fact, but it's very challenging to think about one fact in a new way. And I think this is kind of historically what we have been we've been struggling with in much of the work that we have in our research around in psychology and in education. So overcoming these kinds of taxonomies between the external and the internal and the objective and the human being, the object and the human being, these are all very important tensions that we've had to try and overcome. They are still with us as a shadow today. So when we are in different forums and we speak about our research or we discuss concepts, how each of us is subjectively configured determines how we make readings of these ideas. And so consequently, this also is an additional tension that we have to explore. So these shadows from the past are always with us. So overcoming these tensions, Fernando rightly says that Vigotsky really did create a space for looking at social meaning and exploring the contradictory aspects of what we had come to understand. So where this focus on unity rather than the siloing is very important. And finally, I think that Fernando raised some very important points for us, again, which fits with the second idea around the method of studying Perizhivanie is, and it links with what Nikolai said too, it's very much about a system of concepts, a system of interactions, a system of the social, the internal, the external. All of these things are brought together, and of course this creates an amazingly complex research context, an amazingly complex way of thinking about humans and human interaction, because we are thinking about the past and how we're configured, we're thinking about the future and where we want to move to, and we're thinking about, well, what is it that creates this development historically and into the future. So the Perizhivanie, subjectivity and emotions, and I've thrown in play as part of imagination, I think provide some really interesting concepts for us to take forward and to heed the words of Nikolai, which is we must stay with them as scientific concepts, not as everyday concepts, if we really want to use them effectively. So can I say on behalf of the panel, thank you very much for listening to the three of us, and we now invite you to ask questions and make comments of the three of us.
Vou passar a palavra à professora Marilyn para coordenar o debate, perguntas por parte de vocês. Mas nós estivemos conversando acá e no sábado aparece uma conversação entre nós que vai ser em inglês. Estava pensada inicialmente para as pessoas que comunicam, entendem inglês. Mas nós estávamos pensando aqui que mesmo que a gente não vai ter tradução simultânea, vamos a ter um tradutor, inclusive um cara da minha equipe, o Osmar, que fala um inglês fluente, o próprio Daniel, que está por lá, pode traduzir essa atividade. Se podem rotar, como fazem eles, Daniel e Osmar estão fazendo assim. Para que vocês, aqueles que não entendem o inglês, possam vir, porque vai ser um momento de fechamento, de perguntas e respostas, de uma conversação laxa, que vai permitir a vocês também amadurecer algumas das reflexões do dia de hoje. Tá bom? Então, passo a palavra para a professora Marilyn como coordenadora da mesa.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I want to just begin by saying I was very pleased that Fernando stopped us to have a break. And why I say that particularly is that I followed the routine of the day before. We didn't stop and have a break, and I thought, Brazilians work so hard. They must have really strong bladders that can hold on all morning. So I was very pleased when he said we could have a break. So thank you, Fernando. Before we begin, I just want to say that Nikolai mentioned when we first started our discussions at the round table that these discussions have already commenced when Fernando González Rey was with us in Australia as our visiting scholar. But also these conversations will continue because we hope that you will come to the ISCAR conference, International Society for Cultural Activity Research, in Sydney, in Australia, in September. Fernando's already mentioned it, but there we will have a symposium on exactly this topic, this theme, and we will discuss these concepts again there. And so that will open up even more dialogue across the international community. So please, if you can come, that would be wonderful. And finally, we want to, just before we begin, say that our dream is to, as both Fernando and Nikolai have mentioned, is that these ideas are all put together in a publication. So we have a proposal at the moment that's been put forward that we hope that these works will come together in fruition into a book, and then that will at least make some of the material available, not just here in Brazil, but of course internationally. So now we begin our conversations, and please, I open the floor to you all and across the streaming to international community that are following the session today to please put forward your comments and questions. So who will begin?
Qual seria o papel da construção teórica no planteamento metodológico de vocês? Por que eu pergunto isso? Porque muitas vezes a gente vê uma tendência misturada no próprio Vigotsky, por um lado, de uma objetivação, e aí derivou toda a discussão sobre a teoria da atividade, e, por outro, um apelo mais forte da cultura e, posteriormente, da simbolização. Então, quando fala, Vigotsky ele apresenta uma ruptura com muitas tendências dominantes em psicologia, por exemplo, da relação linear entre processos mentais e expressão. Vigotsky não vai se fixar na ideia de padrão, que é muito em voga hoje para os cognitivistas. Ele começa a falar muito a respeito de um tipo de fenômeno, vamos falar assim, de subjetividade, né? Extremamente complexo, organizacional, sistêmico. E, por isso, o professor Fernando propõe a ideia de configuração. E essa ideia é uma ideia que ela se contrapõe, por exemplo, à noção de lei, que levantou aqui algumas vezes, né? Então, quando a gente vê um trabalho discutido, apresentado, como, por exemplo, a professora Marilyn acabou de mostrar na intervenção com as crianças, eu fico assim curioso para saber como seria a construção que é feita em cima dos indicadores que essas cenas mostram. A ideia do jogo, né, como a senhora coloca, que é extremamente interessante, mas o que a gente faz com essa informação, considerando que estamos lidando com uma realidade que ela é muito sistêmica, que ela não é não linear, que ela é organizacional mesmo.
Esse tema que você toca, Maurício, é extremamente importante de meu ponto de vista, porque evidentemente que quando se trouxe a discussão da categoria Perizhivanie, a categoria sentido, a categoria configuração, são conceitos que não tomam significado imediatamente do material descritivo imediato do empírico. Aliás, eu acho que nada toma um significado imediatamente do empírico, ou seja, todo o material empírico sempre entra em representações teóricas que permitem produzir um significado sobre ele. Porém, o que você pergunta também para mim é extremamente pertinente. ¿Por quê? Por exemplo, a professora Marilyn trouxe para nós um material de extrema densidade empírica, muito bem, muito... eu acho que, inclusive, que em nosso grupo vamos a discutir como o registro da multiplicidade da situação cotidiana é importante. Porém, esse registro, ao meu ver, e isso é o que postulo na epistemologia qualitativa, ele não pode acompanhar uma descrição como aquela apenas que fazia a antropologia, porque a descrição é uma porta para modelos teóricos que sempre estão além do dado imediato. Nós estamos trabalhando com conceitos que realmente são modelos teóricos. Eu posso estar enganado, porque não enganado, na ciência não tem engano, tem posições diferentes, claro, umas melhores do que outras, mas eu sinto que fazer ciência no momento atual, mais com esta referência permanente ao complexo, ao multivariado, aos sistemas que têm mobilidade, que são impossíveis de ser aprendidos em uma finalidade, significa fazer teoria. Para mim significa fazer teoria. E isto não é apenas um tema das ciências sociais. Ou seja, por exemplo, isto está colocado por Perizhivanie claramente em relação com as estruturas dissipativas. As estruturas dissipativas são um modelo teórico, verdade? Não são uma realidade imediata, tangível de operacionalizar. A operacionalização pertence ao positivismo realmente, o operacionalismo de Birman. Então, nós estamos em um patamar que eu penso que é de desenvolvimento, de debatir problemas metodológicos que têm um trasfondo epistemológico necessário e extremamente complexo. Esse é como eu vejo o assunto.
I'll just add to that. You actually made the statement that the linear thought process and experiences do not stay fixed, and that this is a type of phenomenon of subjectivity. And I think that in the construction of research, that was the word that was used for that by the translators. I don't know if that was the word you used, but the kind of examples, because I shared it only as an example in order to bring together the discussions around social situation development and the ideal and real form. But in the research itself, the way in which the material is constructed, using your term, is very much in relation to seeing the whole, and with the whole actually understanding the dimensions of that whole. And so the examples that you saw there are embedded in a richness of 100 hours of data. And that richness of 100 hours of data has been constructed so that there is, in my files, so if we're talking sort of from a physical perspective, the files are in their raw state, but they are also then, each of the files, the hours of video material, are all logged, so that any moment a section of the whole can be retrieved, and each of the logs have all been logged in relation to 3 levels of analysis, so that we're kind of, in a sense, looking at the everyday situation and then the everyday situation across data sets, so that we see the concept of social situation of development emerging across a number of data sets, and then the 3rd level of analysis of the same material, and that's usually, that 2nd level is usually copied and cut into video clips, so that they again kept intact. So we have 1 or 2 minute clips like you saw, but they're all coded back to the overall whole raw data. And then from those clips, they are brought together into a 3rd level of analysis where the files very much link those in relation to the research questions. So the specific concepts guide this level of analysis. But from that, those concepts come together as a system of concepts, which then answer a research question. But they also sit within the context of the whole data set, so that at any moment, a particular aspect of a situation, a social situation, can be analysed in relation to the social situation development from the perspective of all of the participants. So we look at a video clip like you saw there from one child, but then we might look at the same video clip in relation to another child, and then we might look at this in relation to what is it that the parent is doing. Or then we go, I draw very much on Marion Hedegaard's work, where she also looks at the societal conditions. So what is it society has created that it has, in Australia, meant that this family, the child opens the fridge and there's no food. So then you start to go back over the data, because video data allows you to iteratively retrace many steps that become, that the concepts actually begin to illuminate. So what you do with this material, how you construct it is the kind of question you asked, from a theoretical point of view, but also from a outcomes perspective. It feeds back into better understanding the everyday life of those families. And in understanding the everyday life of those families, we come to better understand the context in which families live in Australia. So it gives us a sense of how is it that two very poor families in a same community with a very similar profile of families, with 4 children of very similar age, both families unemployed and draw on government fundings, how are they experiencing everyday life? And so we can look at it from a societal point of view. What are the policies that have enabled this to happen? We can look at it from the parents' point of view. What choices and decisions are families making that mean that one fridge is full and one fridge is empty? And so on. So you begin to feed back into understandings about everyday life in poor communities in Australia in a particular way. So that's just in relation to that video set. Of course, I have other data and other research questions, but I think that's perhaps answered your question. Yeah, good.
Fernando, how now the leader? You are leading the discussion now, or still Marilyn? No, I would just want to respond. I'm asking the permission of who is the boss today? Okay, Marilyn, can I? Okay. What I want to say is that I don't know what Marilyn thinks and Fernando, but I myself, I'm deeply impressed of the quality of the questions coming from the audience yesterday and today. I tell you honestly, from Chile conference, we had participated in a conference in Chile. It was a fantastic conference, but the questions from the audience were not as high level as we have here. Every question is very deep and really rises the complex issues. So that's my reflection, if you like. But as to comment to this fantastic question, very shortly, the first point to answer is that if you ask the question, what is the world we live in? Is it an objective world or is it a subjective world? For many people, the world around us is an objective world, and we are the subjects living in the objective world. If you do physics, it's okay, because as a subject you can make a study of this objective world, physical bodies, so measuring, so if I am a biologist, you are saying as a subject, as a biology, I try to find the objective laws of biological development and all this stuff. But once you start to do psychology, you suddenly realize that the world we live at is a subjective world. Let's take this city, Brasilia. This whole city was constructed by the one architect I don't remember his name. Please, Fernando. Huh? Yeah, Niemeyer. This is his subjectivity now around us. Okay, and our subjectivity is in a dialogue of his subjectivity. And this is our environment. Is it objective or is it subjective? As a physicist, biologist, I might say, yeah, objective. As a psychologist, I say, no, it's a subjective. And it creates my subjectivity. You might say, okay, let's go to Selva. No buildings anymore. Selva. Nobody constructed. It's in nature. Is it objective? I say, no. It is subjective because if I go to Selva for the rest, my perception of the Selva will be different for those who comes to Selva in order to buy a piece of land, to build a house. My image or perception of the same Selva will be different because my subjectivity is different from the subjectivity of the guy who just comes to the Selva in order to buy a piece of land to construct a house. This is the basic point of the scientific thinking in psychology as a basic assumptions saying that psychology, any kind of psychology theory should start from the position that we live subjectively as subjects in a subjective world. This is the beginning of every scientific research in psychology. Like for physics, that I can observe physical processes subjective. They start from this. We cannot start from that because it's not, our science is a science about subjectivity. How subject lives in the subjective world. How subjective world constructs the subject. How subject reconstructs the subjective world. And therefore, Vygotsky's idea of social environment, which shapes human minds, is so important. It was a revolutionary approach. He was the first who said openly that, hey guys, let's stop this division of the subject and the object. Everything we do subjectively in the subjective world as a subjects. That's it. Let's start from this. Let's start to create a new theory of psychology from this. That was a revolution which was not mentioned, which was not understood. And thanks to Fernando, who was the first pioneering researcher in the world, saying that the real Vygotsky's revolution was not in presenting new concepts, new ways. No, it was just he suggested that we have to start thinking on a different basis as all the other sciences, because these sciences are about objective world. Our science, psychology, is about subjective world. So that's my comment. And my second comment answering the question is about for what we need a theory. Why we need a theoretical discoveries, theoretical analysis? Why? What is theory? Just a tradition of scientific science that I cannot submit the paper to publish in a journal if it has no theoretical framework. I just write it because I want my paper to be accepted in a journal. By the way, we have a lot of papers like this. Yeah. You look on the theoretical part, say, oh, it is great. Then you go to experimental part, you see that there is no link between this. Yeah, great. No. Theory is the tool, the glasses, which helps us to see the whole iceberg. Having no these glasses, I can only see the top of the iceberg. Theory theoretical concepts are the glasses, the tools which makes us able to see the whole picture. If we want to see the whole picture. If we don't want to see the whole picture, we don't need any glasses. Just so. Therefore, theory is very important. Absolutely. But having only theoretical glasses, you can only see the whole iceberg. You need more. You need some devices to analyze, to make a research on whole glass. It's like on the other side of the dish, you have cords and connections. You need some devices for measuring, for analyzing the electricity, like a power or the voltage or so on. You need some technical equipment as all the physicians do. They're using a lot of equipments for their experimental studies. So they're using even a big hadron collider as a device which can prove or not prove the Higgs boson, okay? So we psychologists also should have such kind of, and method, what we call research methodology is this device which helps us to create a situation to make it clear, to make it easy to absorb what happens. Like a big hadron collider creates the situation which never happens in the Earth, especially just to make us able to find the particle we cannot find if we have no this device at all. Do you understand what I mean? So Vigotsky says that we have to use some requirements of experimental design, create artificial situation of development in order to analyze, not just to look at the iceberg, but to initiate the movement inside the iceberg and then capture these movements and then make it analyzable. So this is the answer to your question. Why we need a theory, why we need a methodology, and why and how this theory and methodology is different from traditional theories and methodologies in mainstream psychology. This is a different, revolutionary new approach to psychology based on new principle of subjectivity, and using theory as a lens and methodology as a technical device for arranging the situations in which we can make things which is hidden, make it observable, as Marilyn brilliantly shown in her examples. That's how it works. That's what we call to do science, to do scientific research. Everything fits together. Yeah. Thank you.
Do we have another question or a comment? And then you're next.
Professor González, de ontem, guardei minha pergunta para hoje, porque o tempo esgotou ontem. Minha pergunta é para Marilyn. Gostaria de saber se Marilyn acredita, que acho que o grupo aqui, a maioria, somos professores. E nossa realidade, a gente tem muito esse contato com a subjetividade, com as emoções das crianças. E eu gostaria de saber se você acredita que a escolificação que você mencionou ontem, ou escolarização, no início, cada vez mais cedo, se ela pode interferir ou limitar a regulação das emoções nas crianças. Então, quer dizer, se a escola, cada vez mais cedo, a rotina escolar, se ela vai atrapalhar essa questão das emoções nas crianças.
Thank you for your very nice question. I have great concerns about the schoolification process that's occurring in some countries and where it's quite intense. But I also have great fears about what may happen in Australia as well, because we're entering a different political context. And my fear is based on the fact that I think that schoolification will never stop the emotional development of children, but I think because when a child is experiencing an isolated siloing of cognition, they are still experiencing something. They are still emotionally connected. But I think the level of emotional connectivity is very, very different. And so, therefore, the development of the emotions and the self-regulation will be in a particular way. And it will give the context in which certain areas of learning may be negatively perceived.
Excuse me, Marilyn. They are asking for...
Oh, sorry. Okay, is that better? Closer? Is that better? Can you all hear me better? Sorry. Shall I begin again? No, okay. So my thinking around that is very much that schoolification does isolate the opportunities for emotional development, and particularly because in play-based programs where there is specific forms of mediation by the teacher, it actually allows for particular concepts to be developed in a deeper and more meaningful way, so that particularly if we think about Vigotsky's work on everyday concepts and scientific concepts, that when the conditions are created which allows for that relations between everyday and scientific concepts to emerge, then particularly in imaginary situations or in situations where children can reenact the rules and roles within society to give more social meaning to concepts, then when children are actually in the social contexts in real life as opposed to a schooling situation, then those concepts have much more meaning for them and they're transformative of their everyday practice. So that's a true sense of development in that area. But of course what comes with that is not just cognition. What comes with that, of course, is how you feel about your learning and how you're expressing yourself and interacting and the social relations you have with other children and the teachers and so on. And those dimensions are incredibly important as well. So I do worry about schoolification and this push-down curriculum because the spaces for children to explore through imagination and creativity are being reduced when this occurs, and when outcomes are perceived as occurring in only one particular way. So thank you for your nice question. Do we have any other questions? I think we had one over here and then one for Daniel. You're going to... We have 15 minutes still. Daniel first? Okay, sorry, I've been gazumped.
Yeah, I'm again reproducing the questions from the people who are following us from the other places. So my question, I'll say that in Portuguese, if you don't mind. A primeira questão é de Ruber Faria, de Arequipa, no Peru. Ele envia saudações dos integrantes do CIPS, Fernando González Rey. Ele diz o seguinte: primeiramente, gostaria de agradecer pela conferência aos apresentadores e à organização. E a sua pergunta se direciona especificamente para o professor Fernando. O senhor poderia nos falar sobre a importância da epistemologia da construção para o estudo da subjetividade em relação com a epistemologia da resposta, que caracterizou a investigação da psicologia tradicional centrada no dado? Obrigado.
Como mi portugués es tan perto do espanhol y es de Arequipa, eu vou responder em espanhol, porque todo mundo aqui vai entender e vai facilitar o entendimento deles, verdade? Me parece que
Fernando,
falo português.
O problema é que quem não vai entender são os próprios palestrantes.
Ah, os tradutores,
é
verdade. Então, a meu portunhol é entendível em espanhol também. Olha, na verdade, eu estou bem afinado com a discussão, como meus colegas aqui têm colocado, e quando nós falamos de epistemologia da construção, precisamente estamos falando de fazer ciência que tem como principal preocupação a produção de teorias. Quando nós, a humanidade, começou a estudar sistemas, que a natureza complexa deles não era idêntica a formas particulares de sua expressão, os modelos teóricos se convirtieron na principal ferramenta de produção de inteligibilidade. Por exemplo, o próprio conceito de Perizhivanie em Vigotsky. Se a Perizhivanie enfatiza, porque é um conceito central associado com a situação social do desenvolvimento, que nenhuma influência social em si mesma tem um significado para o desenvolvimento e que o significado que uma influência social terá para o desenvolvimento depende da Perizhivanie que se produz como resultado do relacionamento da personalidade da criança e esse mundo que ele está vivendo. Evidentemente, o estudio da subjetividade supõe caminhos hipotéticos a través de indicadores diversos, onde usando